All right, guys, it's straight up 8 o'clock. Let's go ahead and get this show on the road because I know there's going to be a lot of questions. So as everyone's filtering in here, we'll go ahead and get started just to make sure we have plenty of time. Thanks everyone for joining us this evening with the American Gelbvieh Association and Agri Spray Drones for a presentation on pasture and forage management. We're excited this evening to be joined by Taylor Moreland and Tucker Green. I'll go ahead and let them introduce themselves here in just a second when we switch things over to the presentation. Wanted to go ahead and start with some very quick housekeeping. Everyone is muted. If you have questions, go ahead and type those into the chat box that you'll find at the bottom of your screen. And we have left ample time at the end of the webinar for questions and answers. So be assured that if you have a question, we'll get an answer for you this evening. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Taylor to get us started here this evening.
Well, thank you, Laura. This is really, really exciting here. Our first webinar on pasture and forage management with drones, something we're really excited about as really kind of what I think is the next phase as far as getting these drones out there in the world across the U.S. So yeah, my name is Taylor Moreland. I'm the owner of Agri Spray Drones. We are the largest distributor of sprayer drones here in the U.S., focused really, really heavily on ag, and not necessarily a drone company, but definitely an ag company. And so we love doing things like this. We love learning about agronomy. We love learning about how these things can solve problems in ag. And so joining me here is Tucker. Go ahead and I'll let you introduce yourself, Tucker.
My name is Tucker Green. I am a regional dealer for Agri Spray Drones located in western central North Carolina, kind of in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. I'm a 7th generation farmer with background in the dairy industry as well. But we have our own drone. We're running a custom application business with it as well, and Pasture was probably our top market here this year. So just excited to be here and share some knowledge with you guys.
Great, thank you. So go ahead and get started here. So kind of the flow chart here. We'll introduce sprayer drones. I know some of you on the webinar here already have some history with sprayer drones, but some of you are very new. So we'll talk briefly about that, look at regulations, talk a bit about some of the markets Agri Spray Drones is in right now. And then we'll spend most of it, obviously, talking just about everything encompassed with sprayer drones in pasture. So for starters, what is a sprayer drone? Well, obviously, it's a very large drone, and it's a multi-rotor drones we're talking about here. So if you're familiar with the camera drones, small drones, just think of that, only with much larger battery, much larger motors, and obviously a tank. And they all have software to operate autonomously, and all of them have a granular system as well for spreading. So when we look at sprayer drone manufacturers across the world, DJI is the largest drone manufacturer worldwide. Those are the drones that we carry right now. They've been in the ag industry since 2015. Very highly engineered, very innovative technology. There are other manufacturers, worldwide. XAG. They are really one of DJI's, I guess, top competitors. They have very good hardware as well. And then there's, besides those two, about a dozen other companies that are making these sprayer drones now. But really DJI, as far as the US market goes, easiest to use software and very, very good hardware. Sizes are going to range up to 40 liters, about 10.5 gallons. Very rapidly advancing technology. We've seen rapidly advancing technology in this industry over the past 3 years for sure. Now in the US, it's been somewhat slow to adopt sprayer drones. In comparison to maybe parts of other parts of the world. A lot of that has to do with FAA regulations. So we'll kind of look very briefly here at FAA regulations when it comes to sprayer drones. There's really 3 main things you have to operate a spray drone legally. 107 drone license. Every drone pilot has to have this. Pretty simple test. 137 and 44807. Those are exemptions. So you have to be basically exempted by the FAA to spray pesticide, and exempted by the FAA to operate a heavy drone that weighs more than 55 pounds. These 2 things are a bit more complicated, but we have regulations consultants here at Agri Spray Drones that do help you through this process. And then we also have a program that you can actually operate under their umbrella, essentially as an applicator for them to get started a bit sooner. And a lot of these regulations are changing pretty quickly. The FAA is taking lots of notice. We're working with them right now on different aspects here. So in terms of the markets that sprayer drones are in right now in the U.S., we are heavily focused here at Agri spray drones right now on these top two. So row crop and pasture really make up the vast majority of what our customers are using these drones for. Row crop being the largest, and it makes sense. Aerial application has been used in row crop for decades. Planes, crop dusters have been used in row crop for fungicide, insecticide, even herbicide in some cases. In certain parts of the country for sure, very heavily used. And so drones are no different in this aspect. It's just a different tool that does the same job essentially, and a different scale that actually gives growers the ability to operate this drone themselves, which is a pretty cool aspect. Now, when we look at pasture, this is a bit different market here because there, of course, is aerial application has a history for pasture and brush control. Just not as deep of a history in most parts of the country that have high percentage of pasture in comparison to row crop. And so things we're looking at here is rough terrain, brush control, that overseeding, interseeding of clover and other types of forage crops, and really obviously giving control to the grower in terms of how these applications are done. But of course, these aren't the only two markets that we're in, and there are lots of specialty markets that we're in as well. Wetland and forestry are really big right now, forestry especially there in the southeast. And right-of-way management, mountainous terrain, we're looking heavily into orchard, vineyard, greenhouse, fruits and vegetables, and heavy lift applications. And everybody's thinking that a drone that can carry 10 gallons can probably carry a keg of beer too. Well, unfortunately, Michael Jordan already beat you to it. This is one of his golf courses, if you guys see this video here, down in Florida, and where I shouldn't say he, but they deliver beer to their patrons on the court or on the course. So lots of different applications for spray drones. But what we're talking about here, obviously, is pasture and forage. So really, what are you going to use a sprayer drone for on a pasture application? Whenever I think back, to whenever I grew up on the farm, we had, dairy and beef cattle as well, Western Missouri. And the reason that our pastures were pastures is because there was too many ditches, too many rocks, too many fences, too many trees, and nobody wanted to, drive anything other than a pickup over those pastures. And so if you don't want to, drive a sprayer over there because it's high wear on the machine, a drone has none of those obstacles. There's no wheels. So really reducing, the machine wear is a really, really big aspect here. And then herbicides, so group 4 herbicides, that's what pasture herbicides are primarily. They work very well on ultra low volume applications. If I jump over to, this sheet here shows you a lot of different, the main pasture herbicides. And if you look at a lot of these active ingredients, they're all group 4s. Almost all of them, which they're systemic. So you don't need a high volume, you just need a way to get good coverage. And as long as you touch that plant with a highly concentrated droplet, that'll have a pretty good effect. Every case that we've seen using any of these products has had a tremendous effect at a low volume. And then of course, granular spreading. So overseeding of clover has been pretty widely used for a lot of our pasture guys. And then we think about, fertility in pastures. We're not talking about applying hundreds of pounds per acre like in row crop. And so this actually could have in some of those hard to reach areas, you want to fertilize pasture, drones could have a use here. Here's a video I like to show everybody just to kind of showcase some before and after on the herbicide application piece. This is a T30 here. You can see some of the penetration, some of that prop wash. This is at a pretty low, it's about 1.5 gallons per acre, using a pretty small droplet size, really, penetrating down through the canopy to touch those growing points on those plants. That's Duracore right there on sunflowers. And then this is actually a row crop, spraying after wheat harvest this is a glyphosate type product. Glyphosate works very well, of course, not used too much in pasture, but as you can see, works very well. Again, a systemic herbicide. This is probably the most impactful, I would say. So this was a customer who had mesquite, so he's down south, and mesquite in some of these pastures and brush in general is pretty widespread, and so this was again, a 1.5 gallon rate, and you can see how effective that was. Flying about 20 feet over all of that brush. Pretty cool stuff. And this is something I just like to show, on the specialty use applications. If you are in an area looking at custom application, there's a lot of stuff you can do besides pasture, besides row crop. So this is that mountainous terrain application that we kind of talked about, flying up slopes that are, over 45 degrees. And then right here would be kind of an orchard type application, and forestry, like I said, not just clear cuts, but actual application over trees themselves. Vineyards, so we think about vineyards and orchards, we think about blowers, blowing vertically, whereas this would be a blower blowing down, top down essentially. And then greenhouse application, something that's popped up on our radar here over the past year. Something that has been pretty tricky to do for a lot of greenhouse operators is shading those greenhouses. So drones have a very unique approach to this. I want to touch briefly here on the operation of a sprayer drone. How exactly does it work? This is a simple flow chart here. We'll kind of go through this one by one. So what's a setup look like? Well, there's many different types of setups for operating a spray drone in the field. This is kind of as simple as it gets right here. Everything can fit in the back of a truck. And for pasture application, this probably might be the best way to do it, because you can land anywhere in that pasture. So getting back to the back of that pasture with a pickup is gonna be a lot easier than getting back to that pasture with the trailer or a sprayer. So you collect a field boundary. You can collect that boundary by flying around the field. You can actually, you can walk around the field, drive around the field. You can use satellite imagery. If you have Google Maps, imagery on the remote, you can actually, this shows it right here. So you can actually plan that field right on the remote. And there, you can use some other, if you have shape files, or if you already have boundaries of your fields, you can import drone imagery to do this as well. And then you just input your parameters. These systems are very well integrated with how you actually input your gallons per acre and your flight speed and your height. It calculates your flow for you. It's a very easy and intuitive system. And then after that, it's really the flight itself is autonomous. So the drone takes off by itself. After you check the parameters there, it flies autonomously from takeoff until it gets back to you. It does the application, comes back to you with an empty tank, and flies autonomously. If you want it to, you can fly it manually back to you as well, but flies autonomously back to the home point. And then all you do is just click land, and the drone's going to land. Just like that. Then after that, of course, these do have small tanks. So one tank is not going to cover a large area, up to maybe 5 acres with a tank load is what you're going to be kind of expecting. And so it's all about refills. It's about getting that drone back to you, refilling the tank, swapping that battery. They are battery powered. The battery's going to have to be swapped likely every flight. But that's as simple as it is right there. Then you just press continue, and it goes back to where it left off and starts the job from there. And then on site, you'll have a generator, and while it's out there applying that next pass, then you just plug that battery onto the charger. And 3 batteries, 1 charge and a generator is usually good enough for most applications to operate continually throughout the day and get large acreage done. So if you've got large pastures, 100+ acres, you can definitely do it with a drone. You're looking at about between realistically 25 to 40 acres an hour, just kind of depending at a 2 gallon rate, I should say, depending on field size and shape. So models that exist right now, T10, 30, and 40. The 40 is definitely is the biggest and definitely the most highly demanded. It has the most advanced software, and it's in terms of obstacle avoidance, which in pastures is highly sought after with lots of trees. The T40 does have the best obstacle avoidance on any drone on the market right now, actually, that we've seen anyways. So we think the T40 for pasture application is definitely going to be the drone for most operators. With that being said, I am going to turn it over to Tucker. He's got a lot of insight to share since he's done way more pasture application than I have for sure. So Tucker, take it away.
Yeah, and just kind of to touch on what you were saying there a second ago and seeing the first question here in the Q&A, although we are going to answer questions at the end, just to touch on this, DJI knew who they were making these drones for whenever they manufactured them. If you've ever held a smartphone or scrolled on Facebook, by all means, this drone is going to be very easy to get used to and very easy to become familiar with and comfortable with as well. But just to kind of lead off a little bit about myself, I am a 7th generation farmer. I grew up on a dairy, actually. We transitioned more into row crops. Our dairy was sold in 2016, so it was really before I was working full time, but kind of got to see a little bit of what all went into it, as far as, herding the cattle, taking care of the pastures and the fence work and everything like that. So just, a little bit of background knowledge there. We actually bought our drone this past year, and as I mentioned earlier, pasture management was definitely our top market as far as custom application goes with these drones. So my experience with the drones is very broad. We've sprayed fungicide over corn, we've sprayed pasture with herbicide, we've sprayed insecticide over a number of different crops. And we really haven't found anything yet that we do not like. Just to be honest, these drones really do a phenomenal job of an even swath and not streaking any fields at all when you're spraying herbicide. They really are phenomenal about that. And the drones themselves, they really don't use the pumps that they use to push out the liquid is really not necessarily a high pressure pump. It really more uses the thrust of the propellers to actually kind of push the liquid down and out to create that 30-foot swath across the middle of the field. And kind of touching back on why our top market was pasture management. Where I'm from, like I said, I'm from the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, and so kind of as Taylor mentioned earlier, what the cow pastures are is what is not in a row crop. If you can't run a combine across it, and we run some combines across some pretty steep stuff, but there's going to be some fields where you can't necessarily get one across, or if there's too many rocks, they're going to fence it in and put some cows on it for sure, try to make a little bit of money off the land. So this drone really can be useful and provide some serious values for cattle farmers in that area, or for people who have rougher land, terraces, just steep terrain in general, really. But that being said, this drone can be super versatile as well. The only application that I have done with this drone over pasture is spraying Grazon Next at a 2-gallon rate over pasture, mixed with insecticide, a drifting agent, and a surfactant as well to help stick the contact. But it could be used for actually spraying aquatics. You could spray 2,4-D in pasture ponds to clean up any lily pads, if you're using that as a water source. You could also spray fence lines that could be grown up with saplings, briars, bushes, shrubs, really any kind of vegetation that is unwanted and unneeded. Eventually, you let those things go too long and it will quite literally tear your fence down and pull it over with all the weight of those vines and shrubs and everything hanging on them. It could also be used to spray herbicide on hay land if you're baling hay for feeding in the wintertime. It could be used there as well. Like Taylor mentioned earlier, the spreader box could be utilized to overseed either clover seed or any kind of other grass seed, really, to be honest with you, and then kind of utilizing that spreader box to spread fertilizer at a lower rate, in some of those harder to get places if you've got a spreader truck or a pull behind or 3-point hitch spreader as well. And I would even go so far in my experience, based on what I've seen, to say that these drones could be used to actually herd your cattle. If you've got a steep pasture and you're wanting to move them out out of a creek bottom or out of the lower end of a pasture back up on top of the hill or something like that, or you're moving them a longer distance, these drones will fly, I would say 15 or 20 minutes empty anyway. So you could push them from one side of the pasture to the other, maybe, a mile or two, something like that, before having to swap a battery. And, like I said, just from what I've seen and spraying in pastures with cattle in it still, I think you could about put them where you want them with this thing, being that it's loud and wind stirred and everything like that. It's gonna move the cattle, that's for sure.
Just make sure you're a good pilot first.
Yeah, definitely don't want to wreck into a cow, that's for sure. That might be a messy situation. Yeah, there's definitely no autonomous steering or self-flying when herding cattle. But just to give you guys a little bit of an example or a scenario that I went through, like I said, we run a custom application business, and we picked up a new client who had previously been getting their work done by Southern States, which is a co-op in our area, but they had actually refused to come back out the following year because the land was so steep, they couldn't hardly get a sprayer on it safely anyways. And so before, they had just been kind of getting what they could get, and it was really only about 30 or 40% of the total acreage on the pasture. And it was what used to be just a small little local airport. And so a family bought it, built some houses on top, and then off of both sides of that ridge, really, I mean, it could have been a ski resort. It was so steep, it was just so steep you really couldn't hardly ride a side by side or a ATV on it. And we'd actually tried to map the edge of the field with the remote controller driving on a side by side. And I had to ask the guy to let me off just because it was so steep. We were up on 3 wheels at one point, so I had to get out of there, walk back up to the top of the hill and find a different option. But yeah, man, that drone, after we got everything mapped out and settled and fixed the way it needed to be, we started flying and immediately noticed how big of a value this could provide for, changes in terrain, changes in elevation, because the drone with the radar and adaptive altitude sensing, it can realize, that there's going to be an increase in altitude and adjust for that automatically and rise up that steep embankment. And Taylor said 45 degrees there earlier, but I would almost go a little sharper than that. It was a pretty steep hill. Like I said, it would be hard to walk up and down, but we sprayed it and then went back about a week later or 10 days later, something like that, to look at the coverage, and it was phenomenal at the results that we were able to see, just as even as could be. And really, for something like that, I mean, a drone is about your only option for steep land like that. And then, with terraces as well, if you've already got a sprayer, I'm sure you're familiar with bending the frame on the truck or the sprayer or tractor, whatever you're doing, rolling across those steep terraces. It really can beat up and it's hard on your equipment. We actually have a ground rig that we run across a lot of our crops on a larger scale, but found use in saving and preserving our equipment on some of the rougher land using this drone. Just to keep from having those, like I said, the frames bending and twisting and just obviously being unsafe on the side of a hill as well. Just these drones are a whole lot better in some of those steeper, harder to get places. But it can not only provide value there, but it can provide quite literally financial value as far as getting your foot in the door and being able to properly manage your land and your pastures, in a proper way, without absolutely breaking the bank. I know that with the GPS guidance and software and hardware between everything that we use on our equipment, you're looking at least $14,000-$15,000, something like that, just to get the software and the hardware to be able to GPS track. So you're looking at almost half the price of a drone right there before you even buy the actual equipment. And you could opt to go without GPS and use foam marker. But with spray and herbicide, you're always going to streak your land like that. And it's just better to have GPS and better to have an even pass all the way across your field. But you know, like I said, you're looking at about $14,000 to $15,000 in software and hardware there, and then you know, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, I would say, on the low end, and getting a tractor or anything like that to be able to get across land in a timely manner as well. As far as inputs and costs go, you know, these generators, you really just have one upfront cost. You have the price of the drone, and then you have, you know, we sell generators that you can purchase with these drones that are made specifically to charge batteries, or you could use a generator that you maybe already have as well. But those are really the only two costs up front. And then when you're looking at cost of operation from there, you know, you're really only burning the fuel in a truck to, you know, get to the spraying location, or a little bit of gas in a generator, which most of the time, you know, we're spraying 150 acres a day, something like that, and not even running through a full tank of fuel in the generator. So, I mean, you're looking at very, very cheap overhead when it comes to actual operating costs, you know, which sometimes cannot be the case when it comes to burning diesel fuel, especially at $5, you know, in other tractors or sprayers, or more traditional manners as well. And I forgot to mention this earlier, just to touch on what Taylor was saying there a little bit ago when he was talking about putting the equipment in the back of your pickup truck. We actually just had a 3,500 day cab dually Chevrolet pickup truck pulling an open trailer, and pulling, you know, 2 tote tanks, 250 gallons on the back of it. And that works great for crops and everything like that. But when you get in these pastures, you know, it's not crops. You can run over it. You can drive through your pasture. So a lot of what I was doing, and especially in larger areas, was I would move out to the middle of the field and kind of set up a central location. Or if it's a very large field, you know, you could chop it up into quarters and move a couple times. But being able to reduce that flight from taking off to getting to the actual spraying location within that field is definitely key with these drones. But being able to drive around inside that pasture, creating new home points for the drone to land at, was a super big, I found a lot of value in that, me personally, saved a lot of time, and just found that it was the easiest way to do it. While I was dragging a trailer over terraces, like I said, it would be really good to keep all the equipment in the back of your pickup truck and just be able to work off of that. But in conclusion, you know, every good cattle farmer knows that the lower the inputs are, the more money you can reinvest into your farm, or honestly put in your pocket at the end of the year, or when you take cattle to the sale barn. I do believe these drones can provide a great amount of value and get your foot in the door to pasture management the proper way. And also just, you know, those in the cattle industry being able to utilize this technology at an affordable price. And that's really all I got.
That was great, Tucker. Thanks a bunch. And I've got some follow-up questions for you, but before I do, you mentioned, you know, steep terrain, and which we have a lot of that in pasture management. So this is a program here. If you guys see my screen here, this is a program called Terra. It's a DJI program, and this allows you to create a 3D flight route. So, you know, Tucker talked about this really steep fields, you know, 45 degrees in some cases, and the radar on the drone is spec'd to actually fly a 30-degree slope with just using the radar, actually sensing the crop, sensing the elevation change with the radar alone. So if you have anything steeper than that, then this program allows you to actually pre-map the terrain. So it's a layered program. So first off, you bring in drone imagery, and this is very, very easily done. It sounds complicated, but I promise you it is not complicated to do. The mapping drone flies autonomously over the area. The T40 can actually do this by itself with the camera on board. And then, so you get the imagery here. The next layer is going to be the attributes. So this program is actually made for orchard application. So down here, you see your histogram. So everything in purple is tree. So that's your sprayed area. Everything in red is obstacle or pole, you know, what you don't want it to fly through. And then everything in dark is a non-sprayed area that you don't want to spray. That's the second layer. The third layer is the actual route, or I should say the boundary that you want to actually apply. So you mark that boundary out. You can change that boundary. You can make it bigger. You can delete points. And then the fourth layer is going to be the actual flight path. And so this program actually takes the imagery from the drone, creates what's called a point cloud. So this is our headquarters in Boonville. You can see there's our building. So that is from the drone imagery. You can see the three-dimensional shape of the building there. And then over here we have kind of some tree areas. This is a flat part of the lot. And the green lines you see, those are spray lines. You can see how they're right over the top of top of the ground. And then as they get into the treed area, you can see those flight paths go up and down over those trees. So if you have brush, if you have a hillside that's really, really steep, this program allows you to mark out areas you want to spray. The drone actually comes in knowing the terrain, knowing the topography, and it actually, doesn't use the radar for the terrain control. If you're using this program, it uses that pre-mapped point cloud, that pre-mapped terrain based on this program. You can see it goes around. You can mark out your obstacles. You can mark your no sprayed zones. So green is sprayed, white is non-sprayed. So this is a really, really cool program, especially I think for pasture management, when you talk about having a lot of saplings or trees or brush that you want to spray. And this isn't a great example because this was mapped at about 400 feet, and these trees don't have many leaves on them right now, and so there's kind of some holes throughout there. But if you map closer, and if you have leaves on your trees, then it'll sense the tops of those canopies and fly right over top of them. Yeah, so that's Terra. And before we take questions, Tucker, I've got I guess one question for you. Since you did a lot of application, I'm sure the last year was your first year doing it. I'm sure there were some challenges. It wasn't all biscuits and gravy. I mean, what were some of the learning curves?
Like I said, I mean, DJI definitely knew who they were making this drone for whenever they were manufacturing it. And actually the software on the drone is made by Android. So, I mean, some people in here might even have an Android phone, so it's very similar to that. And then an iPhone as well, as far as, being able to actually handle the remote controller and the software, which pretty much that's the brain of the drone. Everything that drone's going to do, you're going to tell it to do from the remote controller. But as far as some of the challenges go, it definitely wasn't biscuits and gravy. I would say probably the biggest concern, or not the biggest concern, but the biggest trouble that I went through was, I'm trying to think of one. Honestly, everything went pretty smooth over Pasture.
Did you ever crash the drone?
So no, not spraying Pasture, definitely not. We did have ours fly up into a power line one time, and so it clipped one of the propellers and went down, and this was actually in corn. So we got the drone out of the cornfield, started talking to, this was before I was even with Agri spray drones, by the way. I was just a farmer at this point, not a drone salesman or a dealer. But so we started, trying to diagnose what was going on with this drone, why it happened, and obviously, how are we going to be able to fix it and get it back going? And this is what I always tell people. I wasn't sure, if we were going to dive into all this tonight, but I always tell people that Agri spray drones prides themselves as a company in before and after the sale customer service. I think that's really where we separate ourselves. When you look at us and the competitors as well, it's just being able to provide that extra value to the customer, and having local dealers in your area with their personal phone numbers, knowing you can reach them anytime, if something happens, and you're not just going to get put on hold by some corporate entity. But anyways, I was off on a tangent a little bit there. Anyways, I flew up into a power line, drone went down. We, got it recovered, everything. Started going through the warranty process and everything like that. Long story short, after we figured out everything that was wrong with it, submitted the warranty request, and I had parts sitting on my doorstep the following morning at 8 a.m. to repair. So I pieced it back together myself. And if you've ever taken apart or put together a piece of IKEA furniture, this drone is very similar in the fact that it is Allen bolts and nuts and everything like that. Very, very simple to work on yourself if you want to. However, I am a regional dealer, and we have dealers across the country as well as technicians in Missouri to work on them. We really leave it up to the customer to decide. But long story short, drone went down and we had it back up and going and flying in less than 24 hours. As a farmer, we work with a lot of different large corporations such as Caterpillar, Freightliner, Kenworth, Peterbilt, John Deere, you name them, we've dealt with them. And Agri Spray Drones is the first company that we had dealt with that was able to get us parts same day or next day. A lot of these other companies aren't even able to ship them for a day or two, and that's even if they have the part in stock. And so, we never ran into having to wait on any parts with ours. And so it was really just a very fluid and easy process to repair the drone and get it back up and going. So yeah, I guess that classifies as a challenge.
There you go. Thank you. Appreciate it. I promise I wasn't baiting you into that. I just wanted your
Good.
opinion.
It's all good. It's all good.
In Caterpillar's defense, their parts are a lot heavier to ship. So
that's true. That is true. That is true.
I think we'll go ahead and open up for questions right now. Laura, you gonna kind of lead this one on, or?
Yeah, that sounds great. So I think you guys have certainly figured it out, but I did misspeak here at the beginning of the webinar. Go ahead and put your questions into the Q&A and we'll go through those and answer live. Julio, you had a question around safety and effectiveness. I think we've covered that, but if we haven't, please go ahead and ask again any specifics that you might have that we missed. So leading into this first question, what is the lead time and cost on a T40 drone?
Laura, if you don't mind, I'm going to go back and touch on Julio's his question real quick. As far as the training goes, we do offer a training service. So a lot of times what we do is after the drone is purchased, we'll get together, or the customer will get together with their local dealer and actually go through a training process to get the customer on their feet, make them familiar with the software, with the technology and everything to do with the remote controller, and actually fly through a couple of routes just to show them what everything's supposed to look like. Usually this can last anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, something like that. But we definitely want to make sure that before the customer goes, just full steam ahead, flying and spraying, that they are very familiar with the software at least. But the only way to really get familiar with these drones is going to be as far as manually flying yourself, is going to be to get in an open field and practice by yourself. That's going to be the only way to really become familiar with the controls and the sticks as far as manually flying the drone. But like Taylor has mentioned before, they are fully autonomous and it is not required.
Yeah, and to add to that just a little bit there, Tucker, what our training has evolved on the Agri Spray drone side, and we do classroom training here. Anybody, doesn't matter who what dealer you buy from, you come into our location, do it virtually or self-paced. And really, as our training has evolved, I've realized that it's really important to understand how a drone thinks and understand, the concepts behind being a drone operator. Because when you think about the shift change going from tractors and sprayers to drones are different in a lot of ways. So it's the first piece of equipment you've operated that flies, that is battery powered, and that is autonomous. It is as pivotal of a shift change as going from a horse and plow to a tractor and plow. What's one of my old seed customers told me, yeah, my grandpa got the first tractor. He was doing fine out there in the open field, driving it around. And then he got a little overconfident. He was pulling it into the barn and he pulled back on the steering wheel and he said, whoa, and tried to get it to stop. And it ran into the barn. And so, yeah, drones are kind of the same shift change. And so a lot of our training focuses on that mindset and that theory and concepts. Yeah. Andrew, your question here: lead time and cost on a T40 drone. So we do have T40 drones in stock right now. So as soon as you pay, you can have it. Next week. We do ship. Nationwide. And most of our dealers are going to have some stock as well. And cost wise, just depends on what you need. Not just in terms of the equipment, but also in terms of FAA regulation. We have a coverage plan that you can opt in on. So you're looking at between really 30,000 to 40,000, depending on what equipment you need and what type of additional add-ons you might need.
Yeah, great. All right, next question here. What do you recommend for flight speed over pastures and row crops versus row crops?
Yeah, so flight speed, pasture versus row crops, this is a bit more tricky to answer because it depends on what your end goal is. So when you fly faster and higher, you sacrifice efficacy for efficiency. So when you fly higher, 10, 12 feet and fast, 23 miles an hour or so, 32 feet per second, you're going to get a wider swath. You're going to get less penetration, but you're going to be able to do more in shorter period of time with sacrificing some efficiency. Herbicide wise, we do tend to want to fly a bit slower to reduce some of that drift, use a larger droplet. So flying about 23 feet per second and maybe 8 to 10 feet, not 12 feet or higher. But of course, if you're doing brush control, then that's different.
Great. All right, Tucker, question for you. Speaking of cattle, I visited with some ranchers and they have been asking about spraying immunizations on their cattle. Do you have any experience with this?
So I don't have any experience with it, but don't think for a second it's not something that we haven't thought about. We've definitely thought about this, with wormers and other as well. But yeah, I have no doubt in my mind, as long as it's a liquid and it's not like paste, that the drone could spray it. But it's going to be more of a matter of, can you get the cattle to stand still long enough and hover the drone over them to actually make contact with the liquid. Maybe if you were flying at 30 foot, something like that, and you could get them to stand there long enough to not spook them, you could spray it. But kind of as Taylor touched on earlier, it would be, you would definitely need to be experienced and comfortable holding the controller and manually flying when trying to do that. But yeah, I think it probably could be done. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, and I'm guessing some heat abatement too. I know, Taylor, we've talked about this before as well in feedlot cattle, using that to cool some cattle off on those hot days. So
we have guys that have done it. I know out west. I haven't followed back up to see how well it worked. And right. Yeah, I see Miles' question here actually on the Mavic Pro to herd cattle. So the Mavic Pro is a small drone. And there's a video I was going to show. It's on YouTube. You can look it up. But so the Mavic Enterprise, which the Mavic 3 multispectral is an Enterprise, a drone that we carry. You can actually attach a loudspeaker to that drone and play dog barking noises to herd cattle, which is what they do actually in Australia that I've seen some videos on.
Pretty cool stuff for sure. So next question here, they want to know on land that's really steep, do you shorten your spray pattern?
What pattern were you using, Tucker, whenever you're spraying pasture?
I was spraying a 28-foot pattern, or like 27.6, something like that, just to be sure that I was getting a good coverage. I'm not going to leave any kind of streaking or anything like that. And I think I was flying around 9.5 foot, something like that. So a little bit closer to 10, but everything worked well for me, and it provided a very good, even, clean kill. But didn't kill anything I was trying not to kill as well. So
yeah, and Tucker had the T30 last year. The T40 may be a bit different in some situations for sure. We do have swath width testing on both of those platforms at different heights, different speeds, different droplet sizes, different rates, and using DRA and non-DRA. So we had a lot of that information, all that information available to all of our customers on the resource folder.
Yeah, next question here. Taylor, are you still dealing with some skepticism from farmers, or are you seeing adoption improve?
Yeah. I love farmers. I love farmers because they're such a diverse crowd. Everybody has the same goal, but experiences are always different. And in backgrounds are always different. So there definitely is skepticism, but the really, really cool thing, and, kind of leading the charge in this industry, coming at it from an ag perspective, has been to, the really cool thing has been to see that mindset change. And sometimes you can see that change in a matter of minutes. When somebody comes up and they see a drone with a 10-gallon tank, they think, well, my John Deere has a 1,000-gallon tank. What's this useful for? Whenever you start explaining that and showing the use cases, seeing the mindset change, in front of your eyes is really, really cool. So skepticism is eroding a little bit.
Good to hear. So you mentioned about the battery that you needed to change it out essentially each pass. What's the life expectancy of those batteries?
Yeah, so life expectancy on a T40 battery, it's a loaded question, because do we have an answer 100%? We absolutely do not have an answer 100%, because we haven't even had a T30 go through a lifespan on batteries yet. And their lifespan was 1,000 charge cycles. So on a T40, it's 1,500 charge cycles is what DJI says. That's what the manufacturer says. You equate this to acres, and you're looking at, so 2-gallon rate per acre. If you can spray 8 gallons per tank, that's 4 acres per tank. So 4 times 1,500 times 3 is going to put you, realistically somewhere between 15,000 to 18,000 acres over a set of 3 batteries. And so battery cost wise per acre, about 50 cents to 30 cents or so.
Great. Next question for you, Tucker. I'm sure you saw it pop up here. Levi wants to know how much you're charging custom for row crop and pasture land spraying.
This is more of a, well, I mean, it's a question that can change. Like, just for example, we spread a little bit of chicken litter on our corn land that we're about to plant, but we pay $10 a ton, and people, 3 hours from us are paying $40, $50 a ton. And so it's really more of a supply and demand kind of question. Are there other co-ops in your areas? Is it a very saturated custom application market? You might be charging $10, $11 an acre. Where we were at for our situation, we were charging $14, $15 an acre, and had more business than we could handle. We were sending business to other people that we knew that had drones and could complete the task. But definitely more of a supply and demand question, and kind of gauging your market and your region to see what other options are out there.
Mm-hmm. Definitely seeing it grow, though, you mentioned.
Yeah, for sure, no doubt. Everybody wants to see that thing fly too.
So next question here, Clint wants to know, can you spot spray? And Taylor, you answered this there at the end of the webinar. Do you want to scroll back there to those slides and show how you can map those spots?
Yeah, so this is one program, this Terra program that you can use to do spot application. Okay, so again, multiple answers to this question. How do you map that area? Well, you can, if you just have few spots, you don't have to map it at all. Use the camera on the drone, on the spray drone itself, on the T40, fly to where you see the weeds, and then turn the sprayer on. There's a mode called Manual Plus, makes this very easy. Fly it manually, but have it control the rate. If it's a bit more intense than that, this program here, Terra, is what you can use to actually bring in a imagery from a mapping drone just like this. And then you can, use this kind of result layer here to actually, find those weeds, and then, mark them, paint them purple or whatever, and just keep on painting them. Or there are other programs, Pix4D and Agrimo are 2 other programs that do the same thing here essentially, but they have some more ag focused results. So you can actually do a weed identification analysis across this area. And if there's a cornfield or whatever, pasture, then basically you could pick out, if you're spraying thistles, let's say, you could pick out those thistles, and it would identify all of them across the field and create a prescription that you would then just do an on-off basically rate for. Load that in the T40, and then it would fly back and forth over, turning on, turning off as it flew.
Just to touch on that a little bit more, also, With the T30 and the T40, they differ a little bit in the camera systems. The 30 has cameras on the front and the back, but they do not rotate. They're fixed positions. So all you can see is what's directly in front of you or directly behind you. With the 40, there's only one camera, but it's on the front, but at the same time, it is a much more high definition camera. And it also has, as you see on the screen there, it's a gimbal camera. So the camera itself can rotate, up and down while you're spraying, or if you're not spraying, just flying across the field. If you wanted to go scout your crops, if you wanted to go look for weeds, you could use that camera to do so. And like I said, it is very high definition. It's a very clear picture on that screen, looking on the remote controller. So it could be used that way as well.
Great. Next question here. Alan has questions about rangeland spreading application in the desert Southwest. He's curious about the effects that you've seen with the T40 in terms of heat and elevations of 3,000 to 5,000 feet. Have you guys done any testing around that, Taylor?
Yeah, so high elevation testing with the T40, if there has been anything done, it's going to be anecdotal at best. We do have, we're closing in on 400 T40s being out there already, but I can't tell you for sure if anybody has used those in those types of elevations, because the things that are going to affect, lift from rotors is going to be, heat. So the hotter it gets, thinner the air, and the higher you get in elevation, thinner the air, and so it takes more, some more rotor speed to generate lift. And so in those situations, will it work? Well, yes, it will work. Might you have to decrease your payload? Potentially. So instead of flying with a full 10-gallon in a T40, maybe you're at 8-gallon. But yes, it will work.
Great. So one that I'm sure that you get quite frequently, Taylor, and one we certainly expected here this evening, in light of the tensions between China and the U.S., are there any support concerns going forward?
We work very closely with DJI and with our suppliers and logistics providers in China. Making sure we keep those channels open. We don't see any issues, any red flags as of now. If we go to war with China, that may change, but we might also have bigger problems to think about then. In terms of the sprayer drone market in general, this is something that we cannot get away from at the moment. China makes, when you look at drones in general, and drone motors, batteries, lithium-ion batteries, China is the only manufacturer of those motors, is the only manufacturer of those batteries. And so it doesn't matter where you're getting your drone from, even the drones that say they're manufactured in the US or assembled in the US, it's from a complete kit that comes from China. And so definitely something that, of course, American made is great. But there's a big reason, I should point this out, there's a big reason China has manufactured all the drones, not just because they make everything, it's also because spray drones started in China. Small acreage. You're looking at a family that farms, 2 acres in China, hand spraying that, backpack spraying that, going to even a small drone is a tremendous efficiency increase. And so that's where spray drones started. And so that's where all the manufacturing hub is located.
Yeah, looking at using equipment like the T40 with radar, do you need an RTK base station with that?
So radar, no. So if you're just doing, let's say, just mapping out your boundary and letting the drone fly and use the radar to do the height control, no RTK is needed. And no internet, I should point that out too. You do not need internet in the field. You do not need RTK in the field to operate these drones autonomously. Now, if you're using the program Terra, like we just talked about, this program here, generate your 3D flight routes, then you do have to have an RTK source. That's what gives your Z height, basically. And RTK source, you can use a base station that, you mentioned the RTK2 base station, that is the DJI base station. You can also use cellular RTK. So every state, almost every state, has cellular RTK networks that are available, or we actually are a dealer for for DigiFarm, and they have a tremendous RTK network that works with the DJI drone platform very succinctly.
All right, this next question's around drone insurance. Are there some good options available today for drones and their equipment?
Yeah, so I don't know if they're good options, but there are options. Yeah, spray drone insurance is very new. So there's only that I know of about 4 underwriters that will write policies. And so any aviation insurance provider should be able to write you a policy for spray drones. We ourselves have kind of found 3 that we really like to work with, and we recommend people to. You're looking at it from a liability policy for drift coverage. You're looking at about $2,500 or so per year.
All right, Tucker, this next question I believe is for you. In terms of obstacle avoidance, how good are the drones, the T40 specifically, at avoiding scattered trees, fences, and brush, things like that?
Yeah, so when you're mapping these pastures and everything like this, and I actually they're not even pastures, the field was actually planted in corn, a couple fields that I sprayed this past year for a guy. He had these isolated trees, spotted in and out. He'd plant 12 rows inside and outside. I mean, it was a mess. But long story short, when you're mapping this field and everything, you drop your boundary pins to create the boundary, but then you also have the option to map obstacles. So using the Google Maps on the controller, you can zoom in and drop boundary points on the tree or on the fence or power line, whatever it may be, so that the drone knows it's there and will automatically avoid it and go around it. Now, that being said, if you don't map it, the drone's not going to hit it. You may just have a little bit more trouble actually working around it in an efficient manner. But, when you actually map it and use it that way, it works seamlessly. The drone will come to a stop before it gets to it. It'll go around it and then get right back in line and keep on going.
I don't like to oversell anything, so I never like to say it always works. It is a fail-safe. It does work very well. But yes, don't rely on it. Don't rely on the radar, but it does work very well.
And definitely always pay attention too.
All right. So maybe another webinar here with this next question. Chris would like to know, how are agri drones used in vineyard and winery businesses?
Yeah. Well, if you have a vineyard or a winery, we'd love to talk to you about doing some testing. This is, so the reason that spray drones were a natural fit in row crop is what I just mentioned earlier. We're not doing anything different. 2-gallon rate with the plane is the same with a 2-gallon rate with the drone, same product. It's just a different tool for the job. And when we look at pasture work, aerial applications have been done in pastures at low volumes, we know it works. Now, when we go into vineyards, we go into orchards, we go into specialty crops, where you've been applying fungicide probably with the blower, maybe at a 50-gallon rate in some cases. And we've talked to some orchard guys, it's even higher than that 100-gallon rate with the blower mister. And then you look at a drone, maybe you do a 10-gallon rate. Well, that's still, 10 times less. And can you get good coverage? Yes, you can. But, it's a high value crop. So you're not going to want to say, we're going to use the drone on, this half of our farm and see how it works. What happens if it doesn't work? You're not going to take that risk. And so we have some data, not enough to share. Currently working on more data to show what applications it's great for on vineyards and orchards, and what maybe you want to stick with your traditional methods. I think right now, timeliness of application after a rain with fungicide on vineyards, orchards is really key. And if you can't get in there because it's wet, drone is going to be a great tool.
Great. I also want to address the fact that it's 8:59. Rest assured, Tucker, Taylor, you guys are good hanging around for a little bit longer to answer some questions. Great, because we have several of them piling up there in the queue. So next question here. How do you get the drone to change elevation over trees and obstacles if not mapping and using Terra to create a 3D plan?
Tucker, you touched on this when you were talking to me earlier about how you can help that drone up.
Yeah,
You wanna talk
so
about that?
the example that I gave earlier, spraying on the pasture that was similar to a ski slope and changing elevation, very, very steep hill. But at the bottom, it kind of flattened out a little bit. So the drone would get to the bottom and kind of stop, turn around, do its thing, start coming back the other way. And when it would get to it, pretty much what the drone has, the information that it has to process, from what's given from the radar is this the field and I need to ascend, or is this a tree and I need to stop? A lot of times it is able to decipher between the two. And like Taylor said, there is a certain angle where it is going to stop. But most of the time it's going to keep on going and spray out the way it needs to. But there are going to be certain things that you can do, and this is even the case on terraces as well when the terrain isn't a constant rate. Where it's changing so often, being able to help the drone in altitude. So, and when I say that, the drone is flying autonomously. I'm holding the controller, but I'm not touching the sticks. But in order to kind of help smooth things up a little bit, you can adjust the altitude of the drone slowly. And when it's doing that, the sticks aren't very sensitive at all. But without throwing it off of its course, you can adjust the altitude and kind of help it over those humps or help it up that hill a little bit, just to kind of smooth things over. And if you don't, it's not going to be the end of the world. It will still work most of the time, but you have to sometimes slow it down because it can only process that information so fast. So you're not going to fly into a 45-degree incline at 25 mile an hour and say this is going to work. Sometimes you might have to slow it down to 15 mile an hour, 14 mile an hour, or something like that, and really let it climb that hill.
Yeah, this is what I like about the DJI system is it's a hybrid between autonomous and manual operation. Like Tucker said, you can adjust some things manually as it continues its autonomous operation.
Without throwing it off, because if you're going to throw it off every time you touch the sticks, then you're never going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next question here. What nozzles would each of you recommend?
This is a bit of a loaded question. Again, and I'll answer on the T40 side. On the T40 side, there are no nozzles. That technically they're rotary nozzles. So there's only really two different types of nozzles that you can run: double atomization or single atomization, and that just widely depends on what you want to do. On the T30 side, they run T-jet nozzles. Typically, you're going to run either an O1 for really small, fine droplets of mist, an O2, XR11002 for a bit larger of a nozzle droplet. Sorry, and then you can run an air induction, so AIXR, and that's going to give you a same pressure in the system, but a larger droplet size for reduced drift.
And I'll just kind of second what he said there. He pretty much covered all the nozzles, but it really just depends on what you're spraying, what kind of droplet size is the chemical that you're spraying call for. But at the same time, with the rotary style nozzles on the T40, you can actually change the droplet size on the go, and it is quite literally crazy to see how instantaneous it is, because as soon as you hit that button, you can see the droplets go from a mist to a rain, or from a rain to a mist, from one major to the other. It's very, very impressive to be able to see that going across the field from, it changing from one to the other, and how instantaneous it is as well.
Yeah. Well, Taylor, are T40s currently available for sale?
They are. I see this question here from Ken. Ken, I don't know when you came by with cash in hand. And that I don't know why we wouldn't sell you one. It's possible that the drones that we had in stock were all spoken for. And we're waiting on the next shipment to come in. So I don't know that particular situation. We sell lots and lots of drones, and so we run through our stock very quickly, and we rapidly advance our restock. So give us a call, Ken. I'd love to talk to you.
All right, Taylor, Tucker, what mapping drone would each of you recommend?
Mapping drone wise, they range from cheap to expensive. It just depends what you want to do. We've literally used a DJI Mini, which is like a $200 drone. It'll work, but if you want better maps, then so the Mavic 3 multispectral is going to be kind of that all-around platform. It's going to have multispectral for crop health analysis. So 4 different bands, 4 different spectrums. It's also going to have a big 20 megapixel big sensor camera for getting that high resolution imagery, along with RTK. If you want to run it, you don't have to. On RTK and a light sensor on top. So it's a really, really good drone for really all around ag platform, Mavic 3 multispectral. We'll have information on that on our website here pretty quick.
Great. Tucker, anything to add there?
No, that pretty much covers it. I hadn't had much experience with 3D mapping as well.
Great. Well, Jake has had some difficulties with obstacle avoidance and wants to know the experience that the two of you have had in overcoming those issues.
Yeah, and so context here would matter a lot, Jake. In terms of obstacle avoidance, it all depends what we're talking about. Obstacles can come in different sizes and shapes and altitudes. And so overcoming obstacles, you ask this kind of that, and I don't know if that phrasing is it, but with the DJI system, whenever the drone sees an obstacle, if it sees it in time, and if you have the settings, check your settings. If you have your settings checked for autonomous obstacle avoidance, it'll try to go around it unless it comes upon that obstacle too quickly, or if the obstacle is too complex. Listen to your drone, it'll tell you. And so if it's too complex or comes up too quickly, it'll tell you to move the stick back or right or left to unlock, basically take the brake off essentially. And then you fly around the obstacle manually. And then with the DJI system, you can return to 3 different points. The break point where you left off from, point 1, which would be laterally in line from where you left off from, so on the other side of the obstacle, or point 2, which is adjacent to where the drone's at. And it's how you you see a tree line, you can move the drone over, and then it'll go back the other direction. So if you have specific examples, please reach out to us, our support team. We can share you some information.
Right. Well, this next question is Nebraska, Iowa specific. Ryan would like to know what protocols are in place to get FAA approved, along with utilizing multi-drone systems.
It's going to take about a half hour to answer this question. So buckle up. So short and sweet here. FAA approved. There's lots of things to talk about here. Our regulations consultant does do part of this for you. So the stuff that happens out in Washington, the manuals, writing, the petition, our regulation consultant actually does a lot of that for you, or all of that for you, I should say. The rest is kind of up to you with some guidance from us, because the FAA local agents are just like your pesticide, local state agents. They need to come see you. They need to make sure that you can actually fly the drone. This process entirely is going to take about a year. But we do have a program. It's called Pharmatude. It's a partnership that we partner with Pharmatude program, and they have a program that you can actually operate as an applicator for them under their 137. So reach out to us for more information on this, please.
Great. I don't feel like I'm gaining much ground here. We answer a question and 2 more pop in.
I'm here all night.
Tucker, Matthew would like to know, do you feel that additional pilots on your team would be best integrated as a second crew, or should you use those guys as an increase in the efficiency on your main crew?
I mean, you could really do either or. If you have 2 drones, one man can pilot both drones, but right now they have a pause in the swarming, so it's going to take 2 controllers anyways. Just be sure you color code them, and you know which drone belongs to which controller, so you don't get confused. But really either or, it's not going to make a huge difference.
Great. All right. Charles says that he uses the regular DJI Smart Farm app. He wants to know if he can create my fields at home on his computer and send them to the remote.
Yes, sort of. So how we do it typically is through shape files, and we'll use different programs. We actually use Google Maps. If you have a Gmail account, you can create a custom Google map. You create a polygon or a boundary on any computer, and then turn that into a KML file, convert that to a shape file, and you can make 50 fields, and it'll all be on one shape file. And then you just have a stick, a USB stick, pop it in the remote, import them. It does a batch import. And so that's how we typically do it. And if you have shape files already, you can use those. Smart Farm app, I have not used this to upload shape files or boundaries to the app and into the drone. So honestly, I can't tell you if that's even possible.
All right, next question. Kevin would like to know if he can take videos or recordings with the spray drone.
Sort of. So you can do a screen recording and a screen capture, not technically video like you might see with like a Mavic or a Phantom.
Great. All right, Tim would like to know if you can edit a map that has already been executed. The example would be starting a map at a higher altitude, then the wind picking up and having to spray at a lower altitude with a more narrow swath.
Yeah, so that's already been executed. So I'm assuming you have a spray drone here, Tim, because executed is like a spray drone term, it seems like in the DJI system. Okay, so what can you do? Once you start spraying that particular field, you cannot change your route spacing, so your swath width. You cannot change your boundary. What you can do is you can adjust on the fly without stopping. You can adjust your height, your speed, and your rate, the application rate. If you need to adjust your route spacing or your boundary, you can exit out of that field, land the drone, exit out of that field, and then go back into it, not in the executing tab or in progress tab, but in the fields tab, edit the field, edit the swath width, and then do a route segment to segment over to where you left off.
Great. Ryan would like to know if anyone has used fly control over a feedlot using a spray drone.
Tucker and I were talking about this earlier, and I think so. Somebody said they were going to try it, but I don't know that for a fact.
Great. So Tucker, my daughter is really interested in the ability of a spray drone to put out mineral as well. So if you could go ahead and try that and let us know how it works, that would be great. All right. How about golf course applications, guys? Have spray drones been used anywhere on golf courses at this time?
They have, but again, it's one of these markets that it's just so different than what is currently being done on golf courses. That a lot more data needs to be collected. We do see some advantages here potentially, again in the wet, wet course applications, but not widespread yet. We're trying to, weasel our way in here by saying, well, not only can you spray this, but you can also deliver beer out to your golfers out there. So we'll see if that works for us.
All right, Tucker, when you're spraying fence lines, do you use all of your spray nozzles or do you remove some? And what was the narrowest swath you were able to do?
So in what I've done, I just used the standard nozzles. I think they were the 2s, I believe. But the slower speed you fly, and the lower the altitude, is really going to be the only thing you can do in the field without actually hard rigging, and changing a lot of stuff. But flying slow and flying at a lower altitude is going to be the way to get a very, very narrow swath. I mean, what would that end up being, Taylor? Like 10 foot, something like that, 12 foot?
Flying lower.
Yeah.
Or slower. Yeah. So
it really just depends on how low you would be able to get. Because if you've got saplings, you might not be able to get below 10 foot. But if you've just got brush and briar over the fence line, you could just about sit on top of it. Yeah,
right. With the T30, you can block off some nozzles and rearrange some nozzles to get a narrower swath. And using air induction nozzles really reduces your swath width as well in the T30, which is one of the nice things about that platform. The T40 is not quite as adjustable on narrowing your swath as much. We are actually working on 3D printing some different types of nozzles or cones for those nozzles to actually have the same effect, reducing that swath width for that type of application.
Great. How about the program allowing for multiple drones to be flown at once? Is that a possibility?
So that, yes, so sort of. All right, there's 3 answers to this question here. So from a technical perspective, can the system do it? The T30 with one remote can connect and control up to 3 drones at once. However, I do not recommend this because think about it this way: if you've got 3 drones in the air with one remote, that remote dies or you kick it off the truck or whatever, the app crashes. Now you have 3 drones in the air with 0 remotes. It's a bad situation. You can operate multiple drones with separate remotes in the same field. The data management is actually much easier, or much better, I should say. The operation has not really changed that much, and redundancy is increased a lot. There's some legality issue things behind this too, which is kind of the 3rd answer there. Then from a technical perspective, can one person even operate 3 drones by themselves? No, not at all. It's a lot of work. One person with 2 drones is technically feasible, yes.
Got it. All right. So when will the information on the T40 be available from your recent testing on swath width, speed, and et cetera to customers?
Michael, you have it right now. So if you look at the email that we sent you, probably whenever you bought your drone, maybe, or the last email you might have got from us, that customer resource folder link, it's a Google Drive link. Click on that swath width folder in that T40 folder within that. We've got a bunch of videos and all the actual PDF swath results and all sorts of stuff in there.
Great. Cole would like to know what the current wait time is for FAA exemptions.
A bit more complicated answer here. To actually get your exemption, your T40 exemption 137 approved from the FAA, between 3 months to 4 months, but to get the full process done on the FSDO side, looks like about a year. We do have a program that you can operate under in the meantime. Reach out to us for more information on that, please.
Great. Kim would like to know how much wind is a factor.
Yeah, wind is absolutely a factor. And in terms of what you're talking about here, so if you're talking about will the drone stay on path, well, it'll stay on 15 mile an hour. So 15 mile an hour is kind of the cutoff for the operational limits of the drone from a safe operating standpoint. Can you go higher than that? Yeah, but is it a great idea? No. But really 15 mile an hour with herbicide with sensitive crop downwind is not a good idea. And then you think about on target application, it's going to be moving that off target, not under the drone, but to the left or the right. And then it's going to, if you're flying into the wind versus against the wind, that's going to change your swath a bit as well too. So understanding some of this stuff is pretty important. Kind of staying under 10 mile an hour if you can is ideal.
All right, Michael would like to know, if you fly over mesquite trees, how high above the ground do you need to fly to keep them from having the obstacle avoidance become a factor?
How high are your mesquite trees? So your tallest tree, if it's 20 foot, then make sure you're at least 25 feet. That's the simplest way to do that, because it's going to sense whatever below it. So if you got ground and then 25-foot mesquite tree, or to make sure you're at least your height is at least that high or a bit higher.
Great. Taylor, do you know of any plans for DJI Terra and Smart Farm to eventually include stand count functionality instead of having to use other software to get those counts?
Well, Bradley, DJI has realized they're really good at making drones. They're really good at making cameras and software to analyze all the imagery or create routes, all that kind of stuff. What they're not good at is agronomy. And so they've actually partnered with some of these other programs. Agrimo is one of them. DJI's partnered with Agrimo, and they're partnering with Pix4D. Agrimo is a really, really cool tool that Agrimo is one of, if not the only drone imagery softwares that is ag only. And so they have really cool AI functionalities. I don't think they have any plans to bring a lot of that in-house, maybe potentially some, but might be better off just using other programs in general.
All right, Lynn would like to know, can you produce as applied maps that could be imported into field view or JD operations, John Deere operations?
Sort of. So you said as applied maps, so I assume you're familiar with how as applied maps look traditionally from your John Deere system, your John Deere sprayer or spreader or planter or whatever. And so it's going to give you kind of a coverage map. It's going to show you the width of that application, the rate of that application across the field, and that can be imported as a, and viewed as there's area type to that. So these drones, they have as applied maps, but technically they are flight path maps because it's an aero platform, and we don't know. The drone doesn't know that it actually did a 30-foot swath. It knows that you set a 30-foot route spacing. And so it's not going to show you a coverage map. It's going to show you a flight path map. But tied to that is going to be your acres. It's going to tell you how many acres. It's going to show you where all the flight paths were at. So it's going to show you basically a coverage map on the flight paths. And it's going to show you the volume, how much you applied. That can all be exported as a KML, which you can convert to shapefile. And yes, you can import into field view or John Deere operations. But again, there's no area tied to that. And so you can't necessarily from that data do yield by application type. You have to actually create a layer within your John Deere operation or field view around that application, call it drone application, and now you have an area tied to it.
All right, Ken says, I understand the spectral analysis software was limited previously. How is that now?
Right. Yeah, so spectral analysis software, it was limited because essentially nobody was using multispectral analysis except for like universities and some ag consultants or agronomists. So it's not a lot of people actually understand what multispectral imagery does. Myself included, I can't tell you that you take the red band and the green band and blend them together and it's going to tell you X, and a lot of universities, frankly, researchers are still actually figuring out what the different indices that you can create based on these different spectrums are. And so software is ever changing, but yes, there are these programs like Pix4D, like Agrimo, and yes, even DJI are getting better and better. So there you go.
All right, I feel like the further down the list we go, the more technical these questions are getting. Dan asks, Taylor, have you done any work with drone deploy? And if so, what's the advantage of the Pic4D over drone deploy?
Sure. So yeah, sorry, I didn't mention drone deploy, even though it's whenever I talk about these softwares, even though it's one of the most widely used image stitching and drone flight softwares. So drone deploy does have ag software with it. I'm a bit more familiar with Pix4D. That's the only reason I talk about it. And they do have some pretty cool tools for some of that spot spraying and weed identification, what they call their magic tool, essentially. And I know that they are working with DJI on some of this, and I know drone deploy isn't necessarily working with the DJI side on the spraying side of it, more so on like the mapping and stand count side of it.
Great. Kelly would like to know if the T40 is already RID compliant.
Yes, it is on the new software. On out of the box, it has the old software, so it does not transmit. But with new software, yes, it is compliant.
Great. All right. Jeff would like to know if there are any concerns with DJI transmitting back to China.
Oh, okay, Jeff. Are there concerns? Well, I don't know. I mean, Yes, these are Chinese drones. And so could they potentially send information back to China? Could they get some information from the drones themselves? Maybe. You know, DJI says no. DJI says we don't, collect imagery from these drones. We don't use the imagery from the drones. But again, can I answer that with 100% certainty? I'm just being honest here. No, I cannot answer that with 100% certainty. So what you have to ask yourself is, what information are they going to be getting from these spraying drones? Not much, frankly.
That they don't already have anyways from satellite.
Yeah, right. Or balloons.
Right.
Yeah.
Or balloons.
We can shoot those down though.
There
All
you
right.
go.
Yeah, Tucker, you got yourself in trouble with this one. After hearing Tucker talk about hitting the power line, should the T40's obstacle avoidance pick up a power line in theory, or is the diameter too small for the drone to recognize?
Let me go back and clarify my crash situation. So there's a lot of different preferences you can do, and pretty much, long story short, the field had a power line cutting through the middle of it, couldn't fly under it. So I set a boundary on the power line. Well, in my preferences, I had the drone set to where as soon as it ran out of liquid, it would automatically ascend and return to home. Well, it came to the end of the row at the same time it simultaneously ran out of liquid. So it lifted up and just barely clipped it. It knew it was there because like Taylor was talking about earlier, listen to your drone talk to you. It said obstacle above aircraft. But like he said, it is kind of a safeguard, and definitely always pay attention to it. But it definitely did end up hitting the power line. But Taylor, if you want to touch on,
Yeah. So what I always tell people is these drones are smart, but they're not magic. And whenever DJI does their marketing videos, you've probably all seen them. They basically have this CGI force field coming out from the drone. It's like a Star Trek force field, it's like, and saying spherical obstacle avoidance. That is not 100% accurate. They have technical limitations. So your question was, is the diameter of a power line too small? It's not too small, but it depends how it approaches that. Is the radar going to be able to actually see it, or is it a different angle for it to see it? Clusters of power lines are easier to see than a single line. That's much more difficult for these to see.
All right, Lincoln would like to know if the wind from the propellers will blow blossoms off of the crop.
Well, I guess I've never seen this happen. Probably depends on what type of blossoms you're talking about here, and how slow. I mean, you have to be flying pretty slow and pretty low for this to happen, I would feel like. Yeah.
Even like with tasseled corn, you're not going to be just knocking it off when you're fungiciding it.
All right, Ryan would like to know if your team has any information on spraying tobacco.
Do we have any information? Not necessarily. Do we have customers doing it? We do. We do have customers spraying tobacco, but I don't know that I have any like data or information on it. Not necessarily.
All right, what is the best time of day for aerial applications?
Depends what you're doing. So, and I don't know if your question here is leading into like evapotranspiration, spraying at a low volume if you're going to have the product evaporate off of leaf surface, or evaporate as it's small droplets going down. We don't see that being really an issue. If you're spraying in the heat of the day, it's more so a question of, do you want to, sweat your butt off or not? And then of course things do get hot, motors get hotter in the middle of the day, so working your machine harder. But I don't know, there's the best time, and this depends on the product too.
Taylor, are customers seeing better results with work done by drones than airplanes?
Yeah, the data here is pretty sparse, and some of it's anecdotal. Depends who you talk to. We have, done some of this on soybeans. So Alex, our agronomist up in Iowa, did this in soybeans. ground rig versus plane versus drone versus control with no fungicides, fungicide application. The drone in that situation was the best, led the ground rig by just a little bit. So basically they're break even or even as far as yield results. And then the airplane was the worst by a fair bit. Well, I shouldn't say the worst. The control was the worst than airplane. But that was one application. We've also seen it where they've been dead even. So it just depends.
All right, how hard is the process of getting the exemption and the aerial application license? I know we've already touched on this a little bit.
It's not a hard process. It's just takes time. But we help you through it. Yeah.
Great. So along with the obstacle avoidance, what's the best way to get your drone back on the same path after the drone detects an obstacle? In my experience, it likes to go to the next line.
Look at your screen very, very carefully whenever you're selecting what point for it to go back to. I don't know which drone you're talking about, 20, 30, 40, 10, what you have, that they're a bit different in how they do this. On the 30 and the 40, it's going to be return point 1 to get it back on the same line, but you have to fly the drone around the obstacle first. Break point is back at the home point, or where you left off spraying. 2 is the next line over.
All right, next question. Have you had any chemical that is not worth spraying from your drone? Or do you recommend, or that you recommend not spraying? I hear that liquid fertilizer is really hard to spray. Is this true?
Okay, so fungicide, insecticide, we don't really have any issues with those. Some fungicides will gum up pumps. We don't rinse them out, so definitely rinse out. In terms of efficacy, so herbicides that are like burners, so we think about like Cobra on beans, on like conventional beans or whatever, post application. These can burn the crop if they're applied in really high concentrations, and so if the wind is pushing that 2 gallon per acre rate to where you're putting a 1.5x rate onto a strip, that's going to burn your crop. So that can be tricky, but also that's off label. And liquid fertilizer, we've sprayed plenty of this as a carrier with fungicide. There's no problem in doing that. When you rinse out with liquid fertilizer, make sure you do not use cold water because it can crystallize some of that liquid fertilizer. Use warm water that's been sitting on the truck to rinse out.
All right, can you touch a little bit on ROI?
Well, it depends what you're doing, John, and how much you charge. If you think about, Tucker talked about it, your startup costs. Let's say you got to buy a drone, all your components, a generator, maybe you got to buy a trailer. Maybe you're looking at $50,000 to $60,000 total cost with everything. And then of course you've got some insurance and stuff like that. It's going to be part of that too. If you can charge $15 an acre, $5 per acre of that is going to be, paying yourself for an applicator, and along with, your operating costs, along with your insurance, along with some maintenance costs as well. So taking home $10 an acre. So you can do some math there on that, figure out how many acres you need to cover. Efficiency wise, if you're looking at 30 acres an hour, it just depends what you're doing, if you can get that or not. 30 acres an hour, so there's kind of your per hour, and then how many days can you spray throughout the summer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Taylor, you mentioned previously that your team offers an in-house training. Is the business portion and ROI something that you cover or touch on in that in-house training?
We do. It's not part of like the regularly scheduled programming, but we always have that question. And so whenever we're having a more in-depth conversation, a one-on-one at training, that's where we can really dive into it with our customers and say, okay, where are you at? What types of application do you think you're going to be doing? What does the market look like? Is somebody else already doing this? Are you competing against somebody, or are you bringing this, as a brand new type of application? Like Tucker said, the ground rig custom applicator refused to do that one field, and so that's technically a monopoly that he had. Nobody else wanted to do it. Yeah, so.
Yeah, and in preparing for this, your team has a business-focused webinar that you've produced previously, correct?
Correct. Yeah, correct. And
so if folks wanted to find that, where would they do that at?
YouTube. Yes, go to our YouTube channel. We got a whole bunch of videos on there. So we have to scroll down a little bit to get to it. We do have starting a custom application spray business on YouTube. And this is a tough question to really just tell you exactly what it is, because it does come down to your local market. It comes down to supply and demand, like Tucker said.
All right, so Kelly would like to know your thoughts in spraying over lakes and rivers to control aquatic nuisance species like zebra mussels, the quagga mussels, milfoil, hydrilla. Will drones do this, or will the surface of the water confuse the radar?
So
Kelly, this is a pasture management webinar.
No, but Kelly's right though. Well, sort of right. We're not going to be spraying mussels in a pasture, but there are some, like Tucker said, lakes and ponds. If you've got weeds growing up, which we've done a lot of that. Spraying lakes and ponds and wetland areas with the T30 and the T20. We've done plenty of that. So is the T40 different? I'd have to ask my team if they've sprayed any water yet. I don't think it's any different. It shouldn't be any different, but it does use binocular vision cameras. So it could possibly be a bit different, but you can actually fix the height to where it's 10 foot high over the home point for the application. So that you just do that with the T40 if the radar is going to be an issue.
All right. Josh would like to know what generator your team recommends or you've had good luck with.
A loaded question, Josh. Okay, because do you want a cheap generator that works, or do you want to spend money on a generator? You can buy a Westinghouse or a Pulsar or a Generac, and those are going to be cheaper generators, but they're not made to run that high amperage, high wattage all day long. So you're going to have probably a shorter life expectancy. Also, I do know we did figure out that, and I know for sure on some Generac generators, they output 60 hertz. You want your generator output 50 hertz. If it outputs 60 hertz, then it's not going to run the T30 charger as well or as fast. I can't tell you how to change that. You better call an electrician to do that for you. To test how many hertz your generator is putting out, but 50 hertz.
All right, I think we're finally down to, well, another one just popped in. We were close to our last question. So Keaton would like to know, have you heard of anyone utilizing reverse osmosis water and being able to reduce application rates as a result?
Yeah, Keaton, these are one of those questions that pieces of data that'd be great to have, but there's so much to test with these spray drones that we have to keep it realistic first. And so very few people have access to reverse osmosis water, and very few people use that. In theory, could you reduce application rates? Probably, but think about it this way. We're already putting out 2 gallons per acre. That's pretty low. And so dropping it down to 1 gallon, if we're looking at herbicide, that could be like, 70% concentration of herbicide in that tank. And so the realistic applications for this could be pretty low, and so we just haven't had the need for the information on collecting this kind of data yet. Sorry.
All right, Drew would like to know if your team does multispectral training.
Yes, we will do multispectral training. Have we started that yet? No, we haven't. But as the M3M gains in popularity, and there's a lot of interest in it for sure, we will do multispectral training and offer training videos on this as well. We are currently in the process of creating that.
All right. Well, I think that we have reached the end of our list of questions here. Really a great conversation, great discussion here tonight, and fantastic questions that have come throughout. Want to thank Taylor as well as Tucker for joining us here this evening. Any parting thoughts, guys?
Well, thank you, Laura. This was awesome. So thank you for helping to put this on. And you know, we love having these really detailed deep dives into one specific aspect on drones. So really cool. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just an honor to be here and be invited to it, and try to help some other folks find some value in these drones.
And if you guys have more questions, you know, our YouTube is typically a wealth of knowledge if you have lots of time, or if you're just really bored. And you know, of course, we have Facebook, you know, posting information there, as well as, you know, trying to keep our website updated. But if there's something that we can't find an answer to, reach out to us, please, and let us know. We'll try to get you an answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're looking for this specific webinar, you can also access it on gelby.com. All right. Well, with that, I think that we're ready to wrap things up here this evening. Again, Taylor, Tucker, thanks so much. And we'll call it a night.
Awesome. Thanks
Thanks
guys.
for joining us, everyone.
We'll see you.
Bye.